Welcome back. In this video I want to show you some more operators, and therefore I'm going to create a variable called num, which I'm going to assign 0 to. And then what I want to do is I want to increment that number, where we had this variable called score and we said score equals score plus 1. Okay, and then we saw that score plus plus would have been a faster solution for that same problem. Now let's just use that with num. So I have a num and I want to show what num is. So num is 0, or num is, let's say, num, like so, to keep it simple. And now if we print that out, our console will close. So let's make sure that it stays alive by hitting a read key or read line at the end. Doesn't matter, each of those is fine. So now if I increment it, so here I use incrementing of variables or of ints. So here I can say num plus plus. Okay, and then in the next line I'm gonna again say num is, and then in curly brackets num again, like so. And now if we run it again, we will see that num is 0 at first and then it's 1. So this is what incrementing looks like. The thing is, it does matter if you are incrementing before or after the variable name. So let me do this again, plus plus num. So there is not just num plus plus, but also plus plus num. So you would use that if you wanted to increment before using the variable. So if I now use, let's say, another console write line statement where I say num is, and in this case I'm going to use string manipulation. I'm going to use num and I'm going to use num plus plus. Okay, so you recall maybe this was string interpolation and now I'm using string formatting. So here I'm using num is whatever num is, but I increment it by 1. So by doing it this way, I will not get, as we would expect, 1, I will get 2. So you see, num is 2. So let me show you this once again, but this time I'm incrementing num after the fact. So here I'm adding the pluses after the num keyword, and you will see num stays 2, because let me add another one where I don't increment num at all. I leave num as is and I run it. And let me just make it here or add it here. You see num now is 3. So what is going on here? So we start here at the top where we say num is 0 and we display num. Okay, so this is where we display it in line 4. Num is 0. So in line 6 we increment it by 1, and in line 7 we're displaying num. Okay, so this is in line 7. Then in line 9, which is this line here, we are incrementing before num is used. So that means that num suddenly is 2 and we're displaying it as 2. Then in line 10, we're incrementing after the name of the variable, and that way it is the same and is only incremented for the next line. Okay, the same, the name of the variable, and that way it is the same. And then in line 10 we're incrementing after the name of the variable, and that way it is the same and is only incremented for the next line. Okay, and then finally we display what num is at that point, which is num 11. So you could call this one pre-incrementing in this line here. Okay, so that's incrementing, and now the same concept works for decrementing, and that's what we're going to look at in the next video. Welcome back. We looked at incrementing in the last video. Now let's look at decrementing. It's basically the same concept, only that you now use the minus. So you could say num minus minus, which basically just reduces the number by 1. So this can be useful if you want to count down, for example. So here I'm going to display num like so again. So num is, and then whatever num is at that point. So we're decrementing. All right, let's run it again. and we see num now is 2. So it went all the way up to 3, and then afterwards we decremented it. And here the same rules apply. So you can do the same thing as we've done here, where we do pre-decrementing and so forth. So let me just copy all of that and then display it to you. So instead of plus plus, we're using minus minus here, and same goes here, just for your demonstration. Okay, so we see this was the highest point, which was at line 12. And that's where we are at line 15/16. So at 16 we're displaying this line, at 17 we're displaying this line. So we're decrementing before using the number, then we're using the number, which is why the number is at 1 at this point. And then we use num is 1, and we're decrementing after the fact, which we then display in line 19. Okay, so this is called decrementing. And then there is another thing that we haven't covered yet and I want to show you as well, and that is, for example, if you have a number and you don't want to increment it by 1, but you want to increment it by a very specific value, let's say by 30, then you can just use plus equal 30. Or if you want to reduce it by, let's say, 10 or whatever, then you can use minus equal. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like in both variants. Let me actually comment all of that out. So I'm marking everything, and then I'm clicking on this little button here. So Control K, Control C would be the combination. You have to do it fast so that it works, or you can just press this button, and then it comments all of those lines out. All right, so now let me run and actually make sure. Okay, so num was 0, and then we incremented it by 1, and then we incremented it by 30, so it should be 31 at this point, and at this point it should be 21. So let's run it, and we see num is 0, then num is 31, and then numbers is 21. So that's a very easy way to manipulate a variable. Now the cool thing is that doesn't only work with plus and minus. This also works with multiplying as well as dividing. So if I go ahead and say num multiply equal 10, then this will multiply the number to 210 in this case. So 21 times 10 is 210. And the same goes for division. So let's do division. Divide equal 20. So we should get 10 using this, because 210 divided by 20 is 10.05, which then ends up being 10 because we're only working with integers. Okay, so we only have ints here, which is why you see we get this value here. So there we are, basically. This is a little bit more about the different types of operators that I wanted to make sure that you have seen and you don't feel lost whenever I use them. There's one last one. I think the video is not too long if I also show you that operator, and that is the modulo operator. So let me get rid of all of that, or actually let me comment all of that out. Let me do it this way, like so, and then like so. Okay, so basically I'm commenting everything out, and it's num plus plus, I'm gonna give it away as well. So I have num1, which will be, let's say, 10, and then I have int num2, which is going to be 3, and now I'm using the result, which will be num1 modulo num2. So what is modulo going to do? Modulo is going to divide and give me the remainder. So 10 divided by 3 is 3, remainder 1. So the result will be 1 now. So let me print that out. CW, well, it doesn't want to help me here, so I'm going to use console.writeLine result. Okay, now let's run this again, and we will see that we do get a 1 in fact. Okay, so this is because, we write it down, 10 divided by 3 equals 3.333, or equals 3 remainder 1. Okay, so that's what's happening here with this modulo operator. The name is modulo operator. Alright, so in case you ever need that, you need to understand that the percentage sign is your modulo operator that you can use in order to get the remainder of a calculation. This can be very handy in many situations. Now you just have seen how to work with it. Okay, so that's it for this video. See you in the next one. Welcome back. In this video we're going to look at try parse, and try parse is a method that allows us to work around the problem of the user entering something that is not a number when we're actually asking the user for a number. So let's create a statement here, give me a number, okay? And now let's ask for that number. So console.readline and actually line, and then we want to store whatever the user entered inside of a string that we want to then convert into a integer. So here, input string, okay? So now I want to convert that input string into a number. And we saw how that works, right? We created this variable int num1 is going to be int.parse, and then we add the input string in here. And then we can just write out what the user has entered. So we could add something to it. Let's say we increment the number, okay? Like so, just to keep it super simple. So user entered number plus 1, and then we just use the num1, whatever num1 is that point is. Okay, so if we now run this code, we will see if we give a number 5, program runs, and we don't have a console.read key here. Let's run this again. So we enter something and it says user entered number +1 is 6. Okay, so that worked. What if we don't enter a number? We saw what happens there. So something like this, we get a format exception. So we get an error because the format isn't right. How do we get our way around it? Well, there is this other thing called try parse. So we can use int.try parse, and it needs to have an input string and it needs to know where to store the result. So where to store the result of that conversion. So if I do it like this, what it will do is, let me actually set it up like that. It will now get the user It will now get the user input. It will try to parse it, and if it worked, it will store the result in num1. So let me run this, and let's enter hi, and then it says user entered number +1 is 1. So why did our program not crash? Well, because of our try parse. Why do we get 1? Because integers by default are set to 0. So this int here is 0, even though we didn't assign any value to it. So by default it's like this. Okay, we didn't add anything here, but still that's what happened. So if we run it again and now we enter a number, then you see it works. And if we don't enter a number, we still get the 1 in the end. So how can we now use this in order to figure out if the user has entered a right number or not? So we can, for example, use something like if statements. Okay, so we can just use this entire statement here inside of an if statement. Because if you hover over this try parse, over this method, you will see what it returns. It returns a bool. So it says give me a string and give me an out, but then I will return a bool. So what is a bool? A bool is a variable that can be either true or false. So in order to do it right, let's create a bool here, and let's call it is a number. Okay, so this boolean will now hold a true or false statement depending on what the user has entered. So now let me add a breakpoint here just to see. So let's enter a number. Then we get to this point where it's trying to convert it. It says is number is false. That's because a bool by default is set to false. It never is true by default. So only when you override it, it will take the true value. So the value of true. So then I can step over, and now I hover over and you see is number now is set to true. That's because I did in fact enter a number. Now let me run this again. Now this time I'm going to add a few letters to my number. Then suddenly it's not a number anymore, it's a string. So now it says it's false because that's the default value. I go to the next line, I hover over it, and is number still false. That's because now I actually didn't enter a number. Because this try parse returned false because it couldn't convert whatever I entered into a number. So how can I use this now? I can use this in an if statement. I can say if is number. I'm gonna say console write line, well done, you entered a number. And otherwise, if it's not a number, I'm gonna say haha you troll, you should have entered a number. Okay? So let's run our software again. Let's enter something, and then it says, haha, you troll, you should have entered a number. And this is how you can use try parse. And then it says, haha, you troll, you should have entered a number. And this is how you can use try parse. Okay, you use it in order to convert a string into an integer number. And if it does work, then you get a number out. And if it doesn't work, then you don't get the number out, but your bool is going to stay false. Okay, so that's it for this video. Now you know how to use try parse, and you can use that in order to make sure that with the software that we have built before, this addition calculator, that it doesn't crash anymore if the user entered something that is not a number. All right, so that's it for this video. See you in the next one. welcome back. In this video I want to show you how you can create a random number, and we're going to use that in order to build a little software that is called Guess the Number. So the idea is that the computer has a number in mind, a random number, and the user can then try to guess that number. Okay, so how can we create a random number? Therefore, we need to use the random class. So there is this class called random, and what we're doing here is we are creating an instance of the random class. So what is an instance and what is a class? These are things that we're going to cover a little later on, but the general idea is that inside of the entire .NET framework we have a bunch of different classes that we can use, and we are already using one of those classes all the time, and that is the console class. So this console class, as you can see here, it says class, has a bunch of methods that we can use in order to then work with it. And by default we don't need to create an instance of console in order to work with it. Otherwise we would have to go ahead and say something like console, for example, my console is equal to new console. Okay, like so. But the console is already made available to us directly, so we don't need to do that. But with other classes, such as with the random class, we need to do that. So just follow along now. This will become a lot clearer once we actually get into classes and objects and creating instances of classes and so forth. But for now, I want to just show you a few lines of code that will allow you to create a random number or generate a random number. So here I'm going to create an int random number, and that will use this random dot next, and then inside of those brackets I can tell what range I want to have. So let's say I want to have a number between 1 and 10, then I would have to enter 1 and 11, because the max value is exclusive. So the exclusive upper bound of the random number returned, max value must be greater than or equal to min value. So this just means that this 11 will not be included, it's excluded. So this will give us a random number. This will give us a random number between 1 and 10. Okay, so I can just say guess the number now. Okay, because we do have a random number, and now what we can do is we can get the user input, and then if the user actually did enter a number, we can compare if the number that the user has entered is the same as this random number. Okay, so this will now contain a random number each time that we run our software. So let's check if the user entered the right number, and then we check if num1 equal to random number. Then we're gonna say CW, so console write line, you guessed right. And otherwise, we're going to say you guessed wrong, try again. Okay, so now we're using this nested if statement, and we pretty much have our guess the number application. So let me scroll out a little bit so you can see it all. This is our app. Obviously we need to have this read key here at the bottom as well so that our software stays alive. Okay, so this is our software, very simple, and let's look over what we do. So first we create an instance of the random class so that we can use its next method, which will give us a random integer that is within a specified range. So that's what this next method does, and it stores it inside of our int called random number. Then we're asking the user to enter a number. We are converting that number that the user has entered, the string, so to speak, we're converting that into an integer here, and where if it worked, then we say is numbers true. If it didn't work, then we say is numbers false. So if it did work, we're checking if the number that the user has entered is the same as random number. Okay, so if that's the case, then we say you guessed it right. And if you guessed it wrong, then we say you guessed it wrong, try again. So let's run our software, and I'm gonna say 5. And you guessed wrong, try again. Well, obviously we don't have a way of running through this again and have a second try, and that's where loops would come in handy. Okay, and loops will be the next big topic that we're going to cover in the next chapter. So in our case, we need to run it again. But you know what? As a developer, I can cheat, because I can just add a breakpoint here, and I can just know what the random number will be. So let me run this again, and this time I'm going to hover over random number. Actually, I can see it down here as well at the bottom. I don't need to hover over the variable, but it's either way, both works. So I can see random number is 2. So now let me go in, or like go to the next step, and actually let me continue. Okay, and now I can just add a breakpoint here, and I can just know what the random number will be. So let me run this again, and this time I'm going to hover over random number. Actually, I can see it down here as well at the bottom. I don't need to hover over the variable, but it's either way, both works. So I can see random number is 2. So now let me go in, or like go to the next step, and actually let me continue. Okay, and now my app will ask me for the number. I know that it's 2, so I'm gonna press 2, and it says you guessed it right. Guess what? I'm the developer, so I can cheat the system, I can hack it, so to speak. Okay, so this is pretty much how you can build your simple little guess the number right application. However, it only really comes to life when you can guess maybe a second or a third time, and that's something that we're going to add in the next chapter. So be prepared for some really cool stuff: for loops, while loops, do while loops, all the good loop stuff. So see you in the next video.
boys, come drop that beat. My love, if you feel like I do right now. like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up just like the sunrise. We gonna light it up now. Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up just like the sunrise. We gonna light it up now.
Welcome to the loops chapter. In this chapter, we're going to look at the different
We set off into the summer night. just